Question 1. The assessment process reveals that an internal quality audit of a clinical trial site has identified several deviations from the site's standard operating procedures, SOP, related to source document verification and data entry timelines. While the internal audit report suggests these are minor procedural lapses, the auditor suspects they could potentially impact the integrity of the collected data and raise concerns about compliance with 21 CFR Part 11 and Part 50. Which of the following actions best aligns with the auditor's responsibility to ensure regulatory compliance and data integrity? Option A. Focus solely on the site's adherence to their internal SOPs, as the primary goal of an auditor is to ensure internal process compliance, not to preemptively engage regulatory bodies. Option B. Recommend a comprehensive external audit by a regulatory body to independently assess the identified deviations and their potential impact on data integrity and regulatory compliance. Option C. Advise the site to simply update their SOPs to reflect the current practices observed during the internal audit, without further investigation into the data impact. Option D. Conclude that the internal audit's findings are sufficient and no further action is required, as the deviations were classified as minor by the internal team. The correct answer is B. Recommend a comprehensive external audit by a regulatory body to independently assess the identified deviations and their potential impact on data integrity and regulatory compliance. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the auditor to distinguish between the purpose and scope of different audit types, particularly when an internal audit's findings might overlap with the objectives of an external regulatory audit. The auditor must understand that, while internal audits focus on process improvement and compliance with internal SOPs and general regulatory principles, external audits, especially those mandated by regulatory bodies like the FDA, assuming U.S. jurisdiction for CCRA exam context, have a specific focus on verifying compliance with the Code of Federal Regulations, CFR, and ensuring the integrity and reliability of the clinical trial data. The auditor's judgment is critical in determining whether the internal audit's findings are sufficient to address potential regulatory noncompliance, or if a more targeted external audit is warranted. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it acknowledges the distinct roles of internal and external audits. An internal audit is a proactive measure to identify and correct deficiencies before they are discovered by external parties. However, if the internal audit identifies significant deviations that could impact data integrity or subject safety, it is prudent to escalate this to a more formal external audit, or at least to inform the relevant regulatory bodies if required by the protocol or regulations. This demonstrates a commitment to transparency and robust quality management. The CCRA role is to ensure that the quality systems are effective and that the trial is conducted in accordance with applicable regulations, which may necessitate a formal external review if internal controls are found to be insufficient. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the internal audit report without further investigation or consideration of its implications for regulatory compliance. This fails to recognize that internal audits, while valuable, may not always have the same rigor or scope as a regulatory audit. It could lead to a false sense of security, masking potential systemic issues that could result in regulatory action, such as FDA Form 483 observations or warning letters. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the internal audit findings as purely operational and not relevant to regulatory compliance, even if they point to potential breaches of good clinical practice, GCP, principles, or specific CFR requirements. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of how operational deficiencies can directly impact the validity of trial data and the rights and safety of participants. The professional reasoning process should involve a thorough understanding of the internal audit scope and findings, a clear grasp of the regulatory requirements applicable to the specific clinical trial, and an assessment of the potential impact of the internal audit's findings on regulatory compliance. If the internal audit reveals issues that could compromise data integrity, subject safety, or adherence to the CFR, the auditor must consider the appropriate next steps, which may include recommending further internal investigation, implementing corrective actions, or advising on the necessity of an external regulatory audit or notification. Question 2. Examination of the data shows that a clinical trial investigating a novel therapeutic agent is in its initial human testing phase. The primary objectives documented in the protocol are to assess the safety and tolerability of escalating doses of the agent in healthy volunteers and to determine the maximum tolerated dose, MTD. The data collection includes detailed recording of all adverse events, vital signs, and pharmacokinetic parameters. However, the data analysis plan also includes preliminary assessments of potential antitumor activity based on exploratory biomarkers. Which of the following approaches to auditing this trial's data collection and analysis best aligns with the regulatory framework and objectives for this phase of clinical research? Option A. Confirm that the adverse event reporting is comprehensive, pharmacokinetic data is accurately captured and analyzed, and that the MTD has been appropriately determined, while noting the exploratory nature of biomarker analysis. Option B. De-emphasize the review of adverse event reporting and pharmacokinetic data, as the primary goal at this stage is to identify any potential efficacy signals. Option C. Prioritize the review of efficacy endpoints and statistical power calculations for these endpoints, as this is crucial for determining if the drug warrants further development. Option D. Focus the audit primarily on the statistical significance of the exploratory biomarker data to assess potential efficacy, as this provides early indications of the drug's potential benefit. The correct answer is A. Confirm that the adverse event reporting is comprehensive, pharmacokinetic data is accurately captured and analyzed, and that the MTD has been appropriately determined, while noting the exploratory nature of biomarker analysis. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in clinical research auditing. Identifying deviations from protocol and regulatory requirements across different phases of a trial. The auditor must discern whether observed practices align with the specific objectives and regulatory expectations of the trial phase in question. The professional challenge lies in accurately categorizing the trial phase and then evaluating the data collection and analysis methods against the standards appropriate for that phase. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it accurately identifies the trial phase based on the stated objectives and then assesses the data collection and analysis against the specific regulatory requirements and ethical considerations for that phase. For Phase I trials, the primary focus is safety and tolerability, with limited efficacy data. Therefore, the data collection and analysis should prioritize adverse event reporting and pharmacokinetic/pharmacodynamic assessments, adhering to good clinical practice (GCP) guidelines, as mandated by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration (FDA), for clinical trials conducted in the U.S., ensures that the trial is conducted ethically and that the data collected is reliable and accurate for its intended purpose. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on efficacy endpoints in a Phase I trial is professionally unacceptable. This represents a regulatory failure because Phase I trials are not designed to definitively establish efficacy. Collecting and analyzing data primarily for efficacy in this phase would be a misallocation of resources and could lead to premature conclusions about a drug's effectiveness, potentially misleading future trial designs and patient care. It also represents an ethical failure as it deviates from the primary safety-focused objective of the phase, potentially exposing participants to unnecessary risks without a clear benefit related to efficacy assessment at this stage. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes extensive statistical analysis of efficacy data in a Phase I trial is also professionally unacceptable. This is a regulatory failure because the statistical power and design of Phase I trials are not intended for robust efficacy conclusions. Overanalyzing efficacy data at this stage can lead to spurious findings and misinterpretation. Ethically, it may also lead to overstating potential benefits to participants or investigators, which is contrary to the informed consent process and the primary safety objective. A third incorrect approach that overlooks the importance of adverse event reporting and pharmacokinetics in a Phase I trial is professionally unacceptable. This is a significant regulatory failure, as the core purpose of Phase I is to assess safety and tolerability. Neglecting these critical data points means the trial is not meeting its fundamental objectives as defined by regulatory bodies like the FDA. Ethically, this failure puts participants at risk by not adequately monitoring for and reporting potential safety concerns, undermining the principle of beneficence and non-maleficence. The professional decision-making process for similar situations involves a systematic evaluation of the trial's stated objectives, the specific phase it is in, and the relevant regulatory framework, in this case, U.S. FDA regulations and GCP. The auditor must then critically assess whether the data collection, monitoring, and analysis activities are aligned with the established goals and requirements of that particular phase. This requires a deep understanding of the distinct purposes and regulatory expectations for each phase of clinical development. Question 3. Performance analysis shows that a clinical trial investigating patient-reported outcomes for new pain medication is employing multiple data collection methods. The auditor needs to assess which method is most appropriate for capturing the nuances of pain intensity and its impact on daily activities, considering the study's primary endpoints. Option A, a daily diary where participants record their pain levels and any activities they perform without specific prompts or validated scales. Option B, open-ended interview questions asking participants to describe their pain experience and how it affects their lives in their own words. Option C, a structured, validated questionnaire administered at each visit, allowing for quantitative scoring of pain intensity and specific functional limitations. Option D, direct observation of participants performing daily activities to assess their functional capacity. The correct answer is C, a structured, validated questionnaire administered at each visit, allowing for quantitative scoring of pain intensity and specific functional limitations. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in clinical research auditing, ensuring the integrity and reliability of data collected through different methods. The auditor must critically evaluate the suitability of each data collection method for the specific research question and the potential biases or limitations inherent in each. The professional challenge lies in moving beyond a superficial understanding of data collection techniques to a nuanced assessment of their appropriateness within the regulatory framework governing clinical research. Careful judgment is required to determine which method best aligns with good clinical practice, GCP, principles, and the specific protocol requirements, while also considering the ethical implications for participants. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the scientific validity and regulatory compliance of the data. By selecting a method that is most likely to yield accurate, complete, and reliable data relevant to the study objectives, the auditor upholds the principles of GCP, specifically those related to data quality and integrity. This approach ensures that the data collected can support the study's conclusions and is suitable for regulatory submission. It demonstrates a commitment to the ethical conduct of research by minimizing the risk of generating misleading or inaccurate information that could impact patient safety or treatment decisions. An incorrect approach that relies solely on the ease of data collection, for instance, fails to adequately consider the potential for bias or superficial responses. This could lead to the collection of data that is not truly representative of the participant's experience or condition, thereby compromising the study's validity. Such an approach may violate GCP principles concerning the accuracy and completeness of data. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes participant convenience over data depth might result in insufficient information to answer the research question, potentially leading to an incomplete or flawed understanding of the intervention's effects. This could be seen as a failure to adequately protect the integrity of the research process. A third incorrect approach that focuses exclusively on quantitative data without considering qualitative nuances might miss critical contextual information or participant perspectives, leading to an incomplete picture and potentially misinterpreting the findings. This could be a failure to collect all relevant data as required by the protocol. The professional reasoning process should involve a thorough understanding of the study protocol's objectives, the specific data points required, and the characteristics of the target population. The auditor should then evaluate each potential data collection method against these criteria, considering its strengths and weaknesses in terms of accuracy, completeness, participant burden, potential for bias, and suitability for the type of information being sought. The decision should be guided by the principles of GCP, ethical considerations, and the need to generate reliable and valid data that can withstand regulatory scrutiny. Question 4. The monitoring system demonstrates that a clinical study involves administering a new drug at varying dosages to a cohort of participants to assess its impact on a specific disease marker, with data collected through regular laboratory tests and patient-reported outcomes. Option A, observational study. Option B, industry-sponsored study. Option C, interventional clinical trial. Option D, investigator-initiated study. The correct answer is C, interventional clinical trial. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in accurately classifying a clinical study based on its design and the data collection methods employed. Misclassification can lead to inappropriate regulatory oversight, incorrect application of ethical principles, and flawed interpretation of results. The auditor must discern whether the study actively intervenes with participants or merely observes their natural course, a distinction critical for determining the applicable regulatory requirements and ethical considerations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach is to classify the study as interventional because it involves a specific intervention, a new drug administered to participants with the intent to evaluate its effects. This aligns with the definition of an interventional clinical trial, which requires adherence to stringent regulations concerning informed consent, participant safety monitoring, data integrity, and good clinical practice (GCP) guidelines. The primary purpose is to test a hypothesis about the intervention's efficacy and safety. Incorrect approach is analysis. Classifying the study as observational would be incorrect because it overlooks the active administration of a drug and the deliberate manipulation of a variable drug dosage to assess its impact. Observational studies, by contrast, do not involve interventions. They simply observe participants in their natural state or in response to standard care. Failing to recognize the interventional nature of this study would lead to a failure to implement the necessary safeguards and regulatory requirements mandated for interventional trials, potentially compromising participant safety and data reliability. Classifying the study based solely on the number of participants would be a flawed approach. The size of a study does not define its type, interventional vs. observational. Both interventional and observational studies can vary significantly in participant numbers. Regulatory and ethical considerations are driven by the study's design and purpose, not its scale. Classifying the study based on whether it is industry-sponsored or investigator-initiated is also incorrect. While sponsorship can influence certain aspects of study conduct and oversight, it does not determine whether a study is interventional or observational. The fundamental distinction lies in the presence or absence of an intervention and the study's objective. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes the study's design and objectives. First, identify the core question the study aims to answer. Second, determine if the researchers are actively manipulating a variable or administering a treatment to assess its effects, intervention, or if they are merely observing existing conditions or behaviors without intervention. Third, consult the relevant regulatory definitions and guidelines, e.g., FDA regulations for interventional studies, to confirm the classification. This systematic approach ensures accurate categorization and appropriate application of regulatory and ethical standards. Question 5. Analysis of an institutional review board's (IRB) review process for a new clinical trial protocol reveals that the protocol was approved within an unusually short time frame. The auditor's objective is to assess the quality and compliance of the IRB's oversight. Which of the following approaches best reflects the auditor's responsibility in this situation? Option A. Verify that the IRB followed its established procedures for protocol review and approval, ensuring all required documentation was present, and that the protocol met the regulatory criteria for approval, regardless of the speed of review. Option B. Accept the IRB's approval as inherently valid, as the IRB is the designated body for ethical review, and their decision should not be second-guessed by an auditor. Option C. Conclude that the rapid approval indicates an efficient and effective IRB, and therefore no further investigation into the review process is necessary. Option D. Focus primarily on the speed of the approval, assuming that a quick turnaround signifies a streamlined and compliant process. The correct answer is A. Verify that the IRB followed its established procedures for protocol review and approval, ensuring all required documentation was present, and that the protocol met the regulatory criteria for approval, regardless of the speed of review. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for timely research progress and the paramount ethical and regulatory obligation to protect human subjects. The auditor must carefully assess whether the IRB's actions, while seemingly expediting research, have compromised their core responsibilities. The challenge lies in distinguishing between efficient administrative processes and a potential erosion of ethical oversight. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the auditor's mandate to ensure compliance with regulatory requirements and ethical principles governing human subject research. Specifically, it requires the auditor to verify that the IRB has followed its established procedures and the applicable regulations, e.g., 21 CFR Part 56 in the U.S., for reviewing and approving research. This includes confirming that the IRB has adequately assessed the risks and benefits, ensured informed consent processes are appropriate, and maintained ongoing oversight. This thorough verification process upholds the integrity of the research and the protection of participants, which is the fundamental purpose of IRB review. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the speed of approval fails to acknowledge the ethical and regulatory underpinnings of IRB review. This approach would be professionally unacceptable because it prioritizes research efficiency over participant safety and regulatory compliance. It represents a failure to uphold the auditor's duty to identify potential violations of regulations, such as 21 CFR Part 56, which mandates a thorough review of research protocols to protect human subjects. Another incorrect approach that assumes the IRB's approval is automatically valid without independent verification is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to perform the auditor's core function. It bypasses the critical step of assessing whether the IRB's decision-making process itself was compliant with regulatory standards and ethical guidelines. This could lead to the approval of research that poses undue risks to participants or lacks adequate safeguards. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of the IRB's actions against established regulatory requirements and ethical principles. Auditors must ask: 1. Did the IRB follow its own established policies and procedures? 2. Did the IRB adhere to all applicable federal regulations, e.g., 21 CFR Part 56? 3. Was the protocol reviewed for adequate risk-benefit assessment, informed consent, privacy and confidentiality, and subject selection? 4. Is there evidence of ongoing IRB oversight throughout the research study? By focusing on these questions, auditors can ensure that IRB processes are not only efficient but, more importantly, ethically sound and regulatorily compliant, thereby safeguarding human subjects. Question 6. Benchmark analysis indicates that during a routine audit of a Phase III clinical trial, an auditor identifies a pattern of minor protocol deviations related to the timing of a specific laboratory assessment. These deviations, while not immediately resulting in any reported adverse events or subject harm, have occurred at multiple sites over several months. The auditor must determine the most appropriate course of action. Option A. Conduct a comprehensive assessment to determine the root cause and potential impact of these deviations on patient safety and data integrity, and then implement appropriate corrective and preventive actions. Option B. Document the deviations but take no further action, as there have been no reported adverse events or subject harm. Option C. Immediately report all identified deviations to the relevant regulatory authorities, as any deviation from protocol is a serious breach. Option D. Focus solely on the absence of immediate patient harm, and consider the deviations resolved if no adverse events are reported in the future. The correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive assessment to determine the root cause and potential impact of these deviations on patient safety and data integrity, and then implement appropriate corrective and preventive actions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in clinical research auditing, balancing the need for timely data collection with the imperative to maintain data integrity and patient safety. The auditor must discern whether a deviation from protocol, even if seemingly minor and without immediate apparent harm, constitutes a significant breach that requires immediate action, or if it falls within acceptable parameters for minor deviations that can be addressed through standard corrective and preventive action, CAPA, processes. The challenge lies in the subjective nature of significant and the potential for a cascade of issues if minor deviations are not properly managed. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach, which involves a thorough assessment of the deviation's potential impact on patient safety, data integrity, and regulatory compliance, represents best professional practice. This aligns with the principles of good clinical practice, GCP, and the overarching regulatory framework for clinical research. Specifically, the International Council for Harmonization IC, GCP E6, R2 guidelines, which are foundational for U.S. FDA regulations, emphasize the importance of identifying and reporting significant deviations. A deviation is considered significant if it has the potential to affect the safety of subjects or the reliability of the trial data. By investigating the root cause and assessing the impact, the auditor ensures that appropriate actions are taken to protect participants and the validity of the research, thereby upholding regulatory requirements. Incorrect approach is analysis. Failing to investigate the deviation and assuming it is minor without proper assessment is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach neglects the fundamental principle of GCP that all protocol deviations must be documented and evaluated. It risks overlooking potential patient safety issues or data integrity problems that could have long-term consequences. This directly contravenes ICH GCP E6, R2 Section 4.11, which mandates that all deviations from the protocol must be documented and explained. Immediately escalating every minor deviation to regulatory authorities without prior internal assessment is also an inefficient and potentially damaging approach. While transparency is crucial, unnecessary escalation can strain regulatory resources and create undue alarm. It bypasses the established internal processes for managing deviations and CAPA, which are designed to address issues at the appropriate level. This can also be seen as a failure to exercise professional judgment as expected of an auditor, focusing solely on the immediate absence of patient harm, without considering the potential impact on data integrity or future deviations, is a flawed approach. Patient safety is paramount, but data integrity is equally critical for the validity of research findings and subsequent medical decisions. A deviation that doesn't cause immediate harm might still compromise the scientific validity of the data, leading to incorrect conclusions. This overlooks the broader implications of maintaining a robust research record as required by regulations like 21 CFR Part 312. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to deviation management. This involves 1. Initial identification and documentation of the deviation. 2. A thorough assessment of its potential impact on patient safety, data integrity, and regulatory compliance. 3. Root cause analysis. 4. Implementation of appropriate corrective and preventive actions. And 5. Documentation of the entire process. This structured approach ensures that all deviations are handled consistently, effectively, and in accordance with regulatory expectations, fostering a culture of quality and compliance. Question 7. Risk assessment procedures indicate a potential vulnerability in the informed consent process at a research site. The principal investigator, PI, has delegated the task of obtaining informed consent for a specific clinical trial to several qualified study coordinators. The audit team needs to verify the adequacy of this delegation and the subsequent consent process. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with regulatory requirements and ethical principles for informed consent? Option A. Review the PI's signature on all executed consent forms to confirm their ultimate responsibility. Option B. Verify that all study coordinators involved in obtaining consent have completed the required human subjects protection training and have documented evidence of their qualification and training for this specific trial, as per the site's delegation of authority log. Option C. Confirm that a witness, who is not a member of the study team, was present during all consent discussions and signed the consent form. Option D. Assess whether study coordinators were present during the informed consent discussion, regardless of their specific training or role in the discussion. Correct answer is A. Review the PI's signature on all executed consent forms to confirm their ultimate responsibility. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in clinical research auditing, ensuring the integrity of the informed consent process when multiple individuals are involved in obtaining it. The professional challenge lies in verifying that each person contributing to the consent process possesses the necessary knowledge, training, and authority, and that their actions align with regulatory requirements and ethical principles. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between legitimate delegation and potential breaches of protocol or regulation. The correct approach represents best professional practice, because it directly addresses the core regulatory and ethical requirements for informed consent. Specifically, it focuses on verifying that all individuals involved in obtaining consent are appropriately qualified and have received the necessary training. This aligns with the principles of good clinical practice, GCP, particularly ICH E6, R2, Section 4. 8. 1, which states that the informed consent process must be conducted by individuals qualified by training and experience. Furthermore, it ensures that the sponsor's delegation of authority is documented and that the site personnel understand their specific roles and responsibilities in obtaining consent, thereby safeguarding the rights and well-being of the research participant. This approach prioritizes the participant's understanding and voluntary agreement to participate, which is the cornerstone of ethical research. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the principal investigator's signature on the consent form fails to acknowledge the reality of clinical research operations, where other qualified personnel may conduct parts of the consent discussion. This overlooks the regulatory expectation that all individuals involved in the consent process are competent and trained. Another incorrect approach, which assumes that any staff member can obtain consent as long as they are present during the discussion, disregards the need for specific training and documented qualification for those obtaining consent. This can lead to incomplete or inaccurate information being provided to potential participants, undermining the voluntariness of their decision. Finally, an approach that only verifies the presence of a witness without assessing the witness's understanding of their role or the consent process itself is insufficient. The witness's role is often to attest to the voluntariness of the consent and the fact that the consent form was signed, but this does not absolve the primary consent giver of their responsibility to ensure the participant understands the study. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a systematic review of the informed consent process documentation, including training records for all personnel involved in obtaining consent, delegation logs, and the consent forms themselves. Auditors should actively observe the consent process if possible, or interview study staff to understand their roles and responsibilities. The focus should always be on ensuring that the participant has received comprehensive information, had ample opportunity to ask questions, and has voluntarily agreed to participate, free from coercion or undue influence, in accordance with all applicable regulations and ethical guidelines. Question 8. Research into a phase Roman III oncology trial sponsored by a U.S.-based pharmaceutical company has uncovered potential protocol deviations related to the administration of a key investigational drug, as identified during a routine internal audit. The audit report indicates inconsistencies in the recorded dosage and frequency of administration for a subset of participants at one clinical site. The sponsor's clinical operations team needs to determine the most appropriate immediate course of action to ensure the integrity of the trial and the safety of its participants, adhering strictly to U.S. FDA regulations and ICH GCP guidelines. Option A. Initiate a comprehensive investigation to determine the root cause and extent of the deviations, implement immediate corrective actions at the site, and assess the impact on data integrity and participant safety while documenting all steps. Option B. Consider the findings minor and rely on the site's assurance that they will rectify the issue internally without further sponsor intervention. Option C. Advise the site to self-report the potential deviations to the FDA and await further instructions before taking any internal action. Option D. Immediately halt all drug administration at the identified site and recall any remaining investigational drug until the site's compliance can be fully verified. The correct answer is A. Initiate a comprehensive investigation to determine the root cause and extent of the deviations, implement immediate corrective actions at the site, and assess the impact on data integrity and participant safety while documenting all steps. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in clinical research oversight, where a sponsor's internal audit findings reveal potential deviations from established protocols and good clinical practice, GCP principles. The challenge lies in balancing the need for immediate corrective action to protect participant safety and data integrity with the sponsor's responsibility to conduct a thorough and fair investigation. The auditor must navigate potential conflicts of interest, ensure compliance with regulatory expectations for reporting and remediation, and maintain the scientific validity of the research. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic, risk-based investigation that prioritizes participant safety and data integrity. This aligns with the fundamental principles of GCP, particularly ICH E6 R2 Section 4. 1. 3, which emphasizes the sponsor's responsibility for the quality and integrity of the trial data. A thorough investigation, including root cause analysis, is essential to identify the extent of the problem and implement effective corrective and preventive actions, COPPA. Documenting all findings and actions meticulously is crucial for regulatory compliance and future audits, as per ICH E6 R2 Section 5. 1. This approach demonstrates a commitment to ethical research conduct and regulatory adherence. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately halting the trial without a comprehensive assessment. While participant safety is paramount, an abrupt halt without understanding the scope and nature of the deviations could be an overreaction, potentially jeopardizing ongoing research and participant well-being if the deviations are minor or localized. This fails to adhere to a risk-based approach and may not be the most efficient or effective solution. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the findings as minor and rely solely on the site's assurances without independent verification. This directly contravenes the sponsor's oversight responsibilities outlined in ICH E6 R2 Section 5. 1 and 5. 1. 2. It risks allowing systemic issues to persist, compromising data integrity and potentially endangering participants. This approach also fails to address potential GCP violations. A third incorrect approach is to focus solely on disciplinary action against the site personnel, without a thorough investigation into the root cause. While accountability is important, the primary goal of an audit finding is to identify and rectify systemic issues. Without understanding the underlying reasons for the deviations, any disciplinary action may be misdirected, and the underlying problems are likely to recur. This neglects the principles of continuous improvement and effective COPPA implementation. Professional reasoning. When faced with potential deviations, a clinical research auditor must adopt a structured, evidence-based decision-making process. This involves 1. Understanding the regulatory context, e.g., ICH GCP guidelines. 2. Prioritizing participant safety and data integrity. 3. Conducting a thorough risk assessment to determine the severity and potential impact of the deviations. 4. Implementing a systematic investigation, including root cause analysis. 5. Developing and implementing appropriate COPPA. 6. Ensuring comprehensive documentation of all activities and decisions. 7. Communicating findings and actions to relevant stakeholders. This methodical approach ensures compliance, protects participants, and upholds the integrity of the research. Question 9. The performance metrics show a consistent shortfall in patient enrollment for a pivotal phase Roman III trial, raising concerns about the study's ability to achieve its originally calculated sample size, and consequently, its statistical power to detect a clinically significant difference in efficacy. As a clinical research auditor, which of the following actions is most appropriate to ensure regulatory compliance and scientific integrity? Option A. Advise the sponsor to continue enrollment until the original target sample size is met, regardless of the extended timeline, assuming the statistical assumptions remain valid. Option B. Recommend proceeding with the trial analysis using the originally planned sample size, even if the actual number of participants enrolled falls significantly short, as the original calculation was statistically sound. Option C. Recommend a formal statistical review to assess the impact of enrollment shortfalls on the study's power and to determine if a sample size re-estimation or protocol amendment is warranted, ensuring alignment with the original statistical analysis plan and GCP. Option D. Suggest an arbitrary increase in the planned sample size to compensate for the slower enrollment rate without a formal statistical re-evaluation. The correct answer is C. Recommend a formal statistical review to assess the impact of enrollment shortfalls on the study's power and to determine if a sample size re-estimation or protocol amendment is warranted, ensuring alignment with the original statistical analysis plan and GCP. Explanation. The performance metrics show a significant deviation from the projected enrollment rate for a phase Roman III clinical trial. This scenario is professionally challenging because it directly impacts the feasibility of achieving the statistically determined sample size, which is foundational to the trial's ability to detect a clinically meaningful treatment effect. Auditors must assess whether the deviation is being adequately addressed to maintain the scientific integrity and regulatory compliance of the study. The core issue is not the calculation itself, but the ongoing management and justification of the sample size in light of real-world performance. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it involves a proactive, data-driven assessment of the impact of enrollment deviations on the trial's statistical power and the subsequent implementation of a statistically sound reevaluation of the sample size or study design. This aligns with good clinical practice, GCP principles, specifically ICHE 6, R2, Section 4. 1.3, which mandates that the protocol should include details on statistical considerations, including sample size calculation and the justification for it. Furthermore, it reflects the ethical obligation to ensure that participants are not exposed to the risks of a trial that is unlikely to yield meaningful results due to insufficient power. Regulatory bodies like the FDA, 21 CFR Part 312, and EMA, UDRA Lex Volume 10, expect sponsors to monitor trial progress and make necessary adjustments to maintain scientific validity and participant safety. A formal statistical review and potential protocol amendment, if required, ensures transparency and adherence to the approved study plan. An incorrect approach that relies solely on historical enrollment data without reevaluating the statistical implications fails to address the core problem. This is a regulatory failure because it deviates from the principle of maintaining the scientific integrity of the study as outlined in GCP. Ethically, it risks exposing participants to a trial that may not be able to definitively answer the research question, thus potentially wasting resources and participant commitment. Another incorrect approach that involves arbitrarily increasing the sample size without a statistical basis is also professionally unacceptable. This is a regulatory failure, as it bypasses the rigorous statistical justification required for sample size determination and could lead to an unnecessarily large study, exposing more participants to potential risks than required. It also undermines the credibility of the study's design and results. A third incorrect approach that involves proceeding with the original sample size, despite clear evidence of under-enrollment without any statistical reassessment, is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence in ensuring the trial's power to detect a treatment effect, potentially leading to a false negative result and the abandonment of a beneficial treatment or the continuation of an ineffective one. It violates the principles of sound scientific investigation and responsible resource allocation. The professional decision-making process should involve 1. Acknowledging the deviation from projected enrollment. 2. Quantifying the extent of the deviation and its potential impact on the original power calculation. 3. Consulting with the study statistician to determine if the current sample size is still adequate or if adjustments are necessary. 4. If adjustments are needed, evaluating options such as extending the enrollment period, modifying inclusion/exclusion criteria with appropriate statistical and ethical review, or formally recalculating the sample size. 5. Documenting all assessments, decisions, and any resulting protocol amendments thoroughly. Question 10. Governance review demonstrates that, while a risk management plan was established for a phase Roman III clinical trial, the audit identified instances where critical risks related to data accuracy and patient adherence to the investigational product were not adequately monitored or controlled by the sponsor's oversight team. The auditor also noted that the established risk mitigation strategies were not consistently applied across all study sites. What is the most appropriate next step for the auditor? Option A. Initiate a focused review of the risk management plan's effectiveness and the sponsor's oversight processes to identify root causes and recommend targeted corrective and preventive actions. Option B. Immediately report the identified deficiencies to the relevant regulatory authority, citing potential breaches of good clinical practice. Option C. Document the findings in the audit report and await further instructions from the sponsor regarding any necessary follow-up actions. Option D. Recommend a complete overhaul and recreation of the risk management plan to address all potential risks comprehensively. The correct answer is A. Initiate a focused review of the risk management plan's effectiveness and the sponsor's oversight processes to identify root causes and recommend targeted corrective and preventive actions. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in clinical trial oversight. balancing the need for timely data collection with the imperative to ensure patient safety and data integrity. The auditor's role is to identify deviations from established protocols and regulatory requirements, and to assess the potential impact of these deviations. The challenge lies in determining the appropriate level of intervention and corrective action when a risk management plan, while present, has not been fully implemented or has proven insufficient to mitigate identified risks. Professional judgment is required to distinguish between minor procedural lapses and systemic issues that could compromise the trial's validity or patient well-being. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the identified deficiencies in risk management implementation and proposes a structured, evidence-based remediation. By initiating a focused review of the risk management plan's effectiveness and the sponsor's oversight, the auditor is ensuring that the root causes of the observed issues are understood. This leads to the development of targeted corrective and preventive actions, CAPA, that are aligned with the principles of good clinical practice, GCP, and the specific requirements of the relevant regulatory framework. This proactive and systematic approach aims to strengthen the overall risk management system, thereby protecting trial integrity and patient safety, which are paramount ethical and regulatory obligations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on documenting the findings without recommending further action fails to fulfill the auditor's responsibility to ensure compliance and mitigate risks. This passive stance could allow ongoing issues to persist, potentially leading to significant data integrity problems or patient harm. It neglects the ethical duty to protect participants and the regulatory expectation that identified risks are actively managed. Another incorrect approach that involves immediate escalation to regulatory authorities without first attempting to understand the scope and impact of the issue internally is premature and potentially damaging to the sponsor-investigator relationship. While transparency is important, a measured approach that allows for internal investigation and remediation is often more efficient and effective, provided the risks are not immediately critical. This approach bypasses the opportunity for collaborative problem-solving and may create unnecessary alarm. A further incorrect approach that involves overhauling the entire risk management plan without a clear understanding of the specific failures is inefficient and may introduce new, unforeseen risks. A targeted review based on the audit findings is more appropriate. This approach lacks the analytical rigor required to identify the precise weaknesses and develop effective solutions. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of audit findings, considering their potential impact on patient safety, data integrity, and regulatory compliance. The auditor should then assess the adequacy of existing risk management processes and the sponsor's oversight. Based on this assessment, a tiered approach to remediation should be considered, starting with understanding the root cause, followed by the development and implementation of targeted CAPA. Escalation to regulatory bodies should be reserved for situations where immediate risk to participants or data integrity is evident and cannot be adequately addressed through internal mechanisms. Question 11. Which approach would be most effective in ensuring that a clinical research audit provides the greatest assurance of subject safety and data integrity, given limited audit resources? Option A. Prioritizing audit activities based on a comprehensive risk assessment of the trial's critical processes and data. Option B. Auditing every single protocol deviation, regardless of its severity. Option C. Reviewing only those study sites or processes that have historically reported the fewest issues. Option D. Focusing exclusively on the most recently collected data to ensure its accuracy. The correct answer is A. Prioritizing audit activities based on a comprehensive risk assessment of the trial's critical processes and data. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an auditor to balance the need for comprehensive review with the practical constraints of time and resources, while ensuring that the audit effectively identifies the most critical risks to data integrity and subject safety. The auditor must make a judgment call on where to focus limited resources to achieve the greatest impact in assuring compliance and the reliability of research findings. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the fundamental purpose of auditing in clinical research, to provide assurance that the rights, safety, and well-being of trial participants are protected, and that the data generated are credible. By prioritizing areas based on a risk assessment, The auditor focuses on aspects of the trial that have the highest potential to impact these core principles. This is directly supported by regulatory frameworks such as the U.S. Food and Drug Administration's FDA regulations, e.g., 21 CFR Part 312, 21 CFR Part 50, 21 CFR Part 56, and Good Clinical Practice (GCP) guidelines E6 R2, which emphasize a risk-based approach to clinical trials and their oversight. A risk-based audit ensures that resources are allocated efficiently to areas with the greatest potential for significant deviations or noncompliance, thereby maximizing the audit's effectiveness in identifying and mitigating critical issues. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on the most recent data collected, without considering the potential impact of historical data or other critical processes, is professionally unacceptable. This approach risks overlooking systemic issues that may have been present earlier in the trial or in other crucial areas, potentially leading to a false sense of security. It fails to provide a holistic view of compliance and data integrity. Auditing every single protocol deviation, regardless of its severity or potential impact on data integrity or subject safety, is also professionally unacceptable and inefficient. While all deviations should be documented and addressed by the sponsor and investigator, an audit's purpose is to assess the effectiveness of the systems in place to manage these deviations and to identify those that pose the greatest risk. An exhaustive review of every minor deviation would dilute the audit's focus on critical areas and likely exceed available resources without a commensurate increase in assurance. This approach does not align with the risk-based principles inherent in modern regulatory oversight. Reviewing only the areas with the fewest reported issues is professionally unacceptable. This approach is counterproductive as it avoids areas where problems are more likely to be found, thereby failing to identify potential risks and noncompliance. The purpose of an audit is to provide an independent assessment of compliance, which necessitates examining areas that may have potential issues, not avoiding them. This strategy would lead to an incomplete and potentially misleading audit report, failing to fulfill the auditor's responsibility to identify and report significant findings. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to auditing. This involves 1. Understanding the trial's protocol, the regulatory requirements, and the specific risks associated with the investigational product, patient population, and study procedures. 2. Identifying critical data and processes that are essential for ensuring subject safety and data integrity. 3. Assessing the likelihood and impact of potential deviations or noncompliance in these critical areas. 4. Developing an audit plan that allocates resources to focus on these high-risk areas, while still ensuring adequate coverage of other essential elements. This systematic process allows for efficient and effective auditing, providing the greatest assurance of compliance and data reliability within practical constraints. Question 12. The review process indicates a potential issue with the sourcing and documentation of the investigational product at a specific clinical trial site. Which of the following actions best aligns with the auditor's responsibilities under the U.S. regulatory framework for clinical research? Option A. Immediately classify the issue as a minor documentation error and proceed with the audit without further investigation, assuming no impact on data integrity. Option B. Escalate the discrepancy directly to the FDA without conducting any internal investigation or gathering additional site-specific documentation. Option C. Focus solely on the immediate documentation gap and disregard the investigational product's supply chain integrity, as the primary concern is the paperwork. Option D. Initiate a detailed review of the investigational product's procurement, storage, and dispensing records, cross-referencing them with the study protocol and relevant FDA regulations, e.g., 21 CFR Part 312, to determine the nature and extent of the discrepancy. The correct answer is D. Initiate a detailed review of the investigational product's procurement, storage, and dispensing records, cross-referencing them with the study protocol and relevant FDA regulations, e.g., 21 CFR Part 312, to determine the nature and extent of the discrepancy. Explanation. The review process indicates a potential discrepancy in how a clinical trial's investigational product was sourced and documented, raising concerns about good clinical practice, GCP, compliance and regulatory oversight. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an auditor to navigate complex regulatory requirements, assess the integrity of the supply chain, and determine the potential impact on data reliability and patient safety. The auditor must exercise careful judgment to distinguish between minor procedural deviations and significant breaches that could jeopardize the trial's validity. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, evidence-based investigation aligned with the principles of GCP and the specific mandates of the relevant regulatory agency. By initiating a detailed review of the investigational product's procurement, storage, and dispensing records, and cross-referencing these with the protocol and regulatory guidelines, the auditor ensures a systematic and objective assessment. This methodical approach allows for the identification of the root cause of the discrepancy and its potential consequences, enabling informed recommendations for corrective and preventive actions. CAPA. This aligns with the auditor's responsibility to uphold the integrity of clinical research and protect public health, as mandated by regulatory bodies like the FDA. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the immediate documentation gap, without investigating the underlying supply chain issues, fails to address the potential for compromised product quality or patient exposure to non-compliant materials. This overlooks the critical regulatory requirement for a robust investigational product management system, which is essential for ensuring the safety and efficacy of the product under investigation. Another incorrect approach that dismisses the discrepancy as a minor administrative error, without further investigation, risks overlooking a systemic issue that could affect multiple trial sites or a significant portion of the study population. This demonstrates a failure to apply due diligence and could lead to the acceptance of a flawed trial, potentially resulting in the approval of an unsafe or ineffective product, a severe ethical and regulatory failure. A further incorrect approach that immediately escalates the issue to the regulatory agency without conducting a preliminary internal investigation is premature and inefficient. While transparency is crucial, an auditor's role includes performing an initial assessment to gather facts and determine the scope and severity of the issue. Premature escalation can strain regulatory resources and may not accurately reflect the situation, potentially damaging the sponsor's reputation unnecessarily. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, clearly define the observed discrepancy and its potential implications. Second, consult the relevant regulatory guidelines, e.g., FDA 21 CFR Part 312, IC E6, R2, and the study protocol to understand the specific requirements. Third, gather all pertinent documentation and evidence related to the discrepancy. Fourth, conduct a systematic investigation to determine the root cause and extent of the issue. Fifth, assess the impact on data integrity, patient safety, and regulatory compliance. Finally, formulate evidence-based recommendations for corrective actions and report findings appropriately. Question 13. The analysis reveals that an auditor is tasked with reviewing a complex phase Roman III clinical trial. Given the extensive volume of data and the limited time allocated for the audit, what approach would best optimize the audit process while ensuring compliance with regulatory requirements and maintaining the integrity of the trial data? Option A. Focus exclusively on identifying and documenting every minor deviation from the study protocol, irrespective of its potential impact on data integrity or subject safety. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive, line-by-line review of all source documents, prioritizing those that are most easily accessible and organized. Option C. Perform a chronological review of all source documents from the start of the trial to its conclusion, ensuring every entry is examined. Option D. Implement a risk-based audit strategy, prioritizing the review of critical data elements and processes that have the highest potential to affect data integrity, subject safety, and regulatory compliance. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive, line-by-line review of all source documents, prioritizing those that are most easily accessible and organized. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in clinical research auditing, balancing the need for thoroughness with the practical constraints of time and resources. An auditor must identify deviations from protocol and regulations without becoming bogged down in minutiae that do not impact data integrity or subject safety. The challenge lies in discerning the critical elements that warrant detailed investigation versus those that are minor or administrative. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach focuses on risk-based auditing, a cornerstone of modern regulatory oversight. By prioritizing areas with the highest potential for impact on data integrity, subject safety, and regulatory compliance, the auditor ensures that limited resources are allocated effectively. This aligns with the principles of good clinical practice, GCP, and the FDA's risk-based approach to inspections, which emphasize focusing on critical data and processes. This method is efficient and maximizes the likelihood of identifying significant issues. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves a purely chronological review of all source documents. This is inefficient and fails to account for risk. It can lead to an exhaustive but unproductive review, potentially missing critical deviations in high-risk areas due to time constraints. This approach does not adhere to the risk-based principles advocated by regulatory bodies. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on protocol deviations, regardless of their potential impact. While protocol deviations are important, not all deviations carry the same weight. A minor, easily correctable deviation might be investigated with the same intensity as a deviation that compromises data validity or subject safety, leading to inefficient use of audit resources and potentially overlooking more serious issues. This lacks the nuanced judgment required for effective auditing. A third incorrect approach is to only review documents that are readily accessible and organized. This approach is problematic because it may overlook critical information that is less organized or requires more effort to retrieve. Regulatory compliance and data integrity are paramount, and an auditor must be prepared to delve into less organized areas if the risk assessment indicates potential issues. This approach prioritizes convenience over thoroughness and compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a risk-based approach to auditing. This involves understanding the study protocol, the investigational product, the patient population, and the regulatory requirements. Before commencing the audit, the auditor should identify critical data elements and processes that, if compromised, would have the most significant impact on the validity of the trial results or the safety of the participants. This risk assessment guides the audit plan, allowing for focused investigation of these high-risk areas. Regular communication with the study team and sponsors can also help identify emerging risks and prioritize audit activities. Question 14. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a participant in a clinical trial has experienced a severe allergic reaction following administration of the investigational product. While the exact cause is not yet definitively established, the timing of the reaction immediately after dosing raises a strong suspicion of a relationship to the study drug. What is the most appropriate immediate action for the clinical research auditor to take? Option A. Document the event in the audit trail but delay reporting until further data is collected to confirm causality. Option B. Wait for the investigator to complete a full causality assessment before reporting the event. Option C. Report the event only if it is definitively proven to be related to the investigational product. Option D. Immediately report the event to the sponsor and the Institutional Review Board, ERB/Ethics Committee, EC, as a potential serious adverse event, SAE. The correct answer is D. Immediately report the event to the sponsor and the Institutional Review Board, ERB/Ethics Committee, EC, as a potential serious adverse event, SAE. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for prompt reporting of potential safety signals and the desire to avoid premature or inaccurate conclusions that could unnecessarily alarm stakeholders or disrupt the trial. The auditor must balance the ethical imperative to protect participant safety with the regulatory requirement for timely and accurate reporting. Careful judgment is required to assess the significance of the event and determine the appropriate reporting pathway. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes participant safety and adheres to regulatory mandates for reporting serious adverse events, SAEs, by immediately notifying the sponsor and the Institutional Review Board, ERB/Ethics Committee, EC. Upon recognizing the potential for a serious adverse event, the auditor ensures that the appropriate parties are alerted to a potentially critical safety issue. This aligns with the principles of good clinical practice, GCP, and specific U.S. regulations, e.g., 21 CFR Part 312 for INDs, 21 CFR Part 812 for IDEs, which mandate prompt reporting of SAEs that are both serious and potentially related to the investigational product. This proactive communication allows for timely investigation, risk mitigation, and informed decision-making by the sponsor and regulatory authorities, ultimately safeguarding participant well-being. An incorrect approach that involves waiting for further confirmation or more definitive causality assessment before reporting would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. U.S. regulations, such as those outlined in 21 CFR Part 312, require reporting of SAEs that are serious and suspected to be related to the drug. The threshold for reporting is not absolute certainty of causality, but a reasonable suspicion. Delaying reporting based on a desire for more definitive proof could violate the spirit and letter of these regulations, potentially exposing participants to continued risk if the event is indeed related to the investigational product. Furthermore, it undermines the ethical obligation to protect vulnerable research participants. Another incorrect approach, such as only reporting the event if it is definitively proven to be related to the investigational product, also constitutes a regulatory and ethical failure. This approach sets an impossibly high bar for reporting and ignores the precautionary principle inherent in safety monitoring. The auditor's role is to identify potential risks, not to definitively diagnose them. The reporting requirements are designed to trigger investigation, not to await final conclusions. This delay could lead to a failure to identify a critical safety signal in a timely manner, jeopardizing participant safety and the integrity of the research. A professional reasoning process for such situations should involve a clear understanding of the definitions of serious adverse event and suspected unexpected adverse reaction, as per relevant U.S. regulations. Auditors should be trained to recognize events that meet these criteria, even if causality is not yet established. The decision-making framework should prioritize immediate assessment of potential seriousness and relatedness. If an event appears serious and there is any reasonable suspicion of a link to the investigational product, the default action should be to report it promptly to the sponsor and the IRB/EC, allowing them to conduct the necessary investigations. This proactive and transparent approach is fundamental to ethical research conduct and regulatory compliance. Question 15. System analysis indicates a clinical research auditor is reviewing a phase III interventional study conducted in the United States. During the audit, the auditor discovers that the study was initiated and enrolled participants for 6 months before any record of its registration appeared on clinicaltrials.gov. The sponsor claims they intended to register the trial promptly and that the delay was an oversight. What is the most appropriate immediate action for the auditor to take? Option A. Advise the sponsor to simply update the clinicaltrials.gov record retroactively and consider the issue resolved, as the intent to register was present. Option B. Immediately declare the trial invalid and all collected data as unusable due to the failure to comply with registration requirements from the outset. Option C. Focus the audit on other aspects of the trial, assuming the registration issue is a minor administrative matter that does not affect the scientific validity or participant safety. Option D. Document the discrepancy, investigate the reasons for the delay in registration, and assess the potential regulatory and ethical implications based on applicable U.S. regulations, including FDA, and recommend corrective actions. The correct answer is D. Document the discrepancy, investigate the reasons for the delay in registration, and assess the potential regulatory and ethical implications based on applicable U.S. regulations, including FDA, and recommend corrective actions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in clinical trial auditing, where a discrepancy arises between the documented registration status of a trial and its actual operational status. The auditor must navigate the complexities of regulatory requirements for trial registration, understand the implications of noncompliance, and determine the appropriate course of action to ensure data integrity and patient safety. The challenge lies in accurately interpreting the regulatory framework and its application to a specific, real-world situation, requiring a nuanced understanding beyond simple checklist compliance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation to determine the root cause of the discrepancy. This includes verifying the registration status with the relevant registry, e.g., clinical trials, gov for U.S. regulated trials, reviewing study documentation for evidence of registration attempts or oversight failures, and assessing the impact of the non-registration on the trial's conduct and data. If the trial is indeed unregistered or registration is incomplete, the auditor must then evaluate the implications based on applicable regulations, such as the FDA Amendments Act (FDA) of 2007 and its implementing regulations, 21 CFR Part 312 and 21 CFR Part 812, which mandate registration for certain clinical trials and specify penalties for noncompliance. The auditor's role is to identify the noncompliance, assess its severity, and recommend corrective actions to bring the trial into compliance and prevent future occurrences. This aligns with the auditor's responsibility to ensure adherence to regulatory requirements that protect public health and the integrity of research. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to immediately conclude that the trial is invalid and all data is compromised without further investigation. This fails to acknowledge that registration requirements, while critical, may have specific nuances or grace periods depending on the trial phase and regulatory jurisdiction. It also overlooks the possibility of a simple administrative error or a delay in data entry into the registry, which might be rectifiable. Ethically and regulatorily, prematurely invalidating a trial can have severe consequences for participants and the scientific community. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the discrepancy as a minor administrative issue, assuming it has no impact on the trial's validity or data integrity. This ignores the explicit regulatory mandates for trial registration, which are in place to ensure transparency, facilitate access to information for potential participants and researchers, and allow for regulatory oversight. Failure to address registration noncompliance can lead to regulatory sanctions, reputational damage, and a lack of trust in the research findings. A third incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the sponsor's intent to register without verifying actual registration. While intent is a factor, regulatory compliance hinges on documented actions. Relying solely on a sponsor's assurance without independent verification is a failure of due diligence and an abdication of the auditor's responsibility to objectively assess compliance. This approach bypasses the essential step of confirming that the required regulatory action has been completed. Professional reasoning. When faced with a discrepancy in clinical trial registration, a professional auditor must adopt a systematic and evidence-based approach. This involves 1. Verification. Independently confirm the registration status with the official registry. 2. Investigation. Determine the cause of any discrepancy, reviewing all relevant documentation and interviewing study personnel. 3. Regulatory assessment. Identify the specific regulations applicable to the trial and the consequences of noncompliance. 4. Impact evaluation. Assess the potential impact of the non-registration on participant safety, data integrity, and regulatory standing. 5. Recommendation. Propose clear, actionable corrective and preventive actions to address the noncompliance and mitigate future risks. This structured process ensures that findings are accurate, well-supported, and lead to appropriate remediation, upholding the principles of good clinical practice and regulatory adherence. Question 16. During the evaluation of a clinical trial utilizing an electronic data capture (EDC) system, what is the most critical set of actions an auditor must undertake to ensure compliance with U.S. FDA regulations regarding electronic records and data integrity? Option A. Observe the data entry process by site personnel and confirm that data is entered into the EDC system in a timely manner. Option B. Review the EDC system's validation documentation. Assess the audit trail functionality for completeness and accuracy of recorded changes, and verify that data entry procedures align with source data verification processes. Option C. Examine the audit trail of the EDC system to confirm that all data modifications are logged, without verifying the system's overall validation status. Option D. Assess the training records of all personnel who enter data into the EDC system to ensure they understand their roles and responsibilities. The correct answer is B. Review the EDC system's validation documentation. Assess the audit trail functionality for completeness and accuracy of recorded changes, and verify that data entry procedures align with source data verification processes. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in clinical research auditing, ensuring the integrity and reliability of data collected through electronic systems, specifically electronic data capture (EDC) systems, within the U.S. regulatory framework. The challenge lies in verifying that the EDC system's functionalities and the data it generates meet good clinical practice (GCP) standards and FDA regulations, particularly 21 CFR Part 11, which governs electronic records and electronic signatures. Auditors must go beyond simply observing the system in use and delve into its underlying controls and validation status. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the regulatory requirements for data integrity and system validation. By reviewing the EDC system's validation documentation and assessing the audit trail functionality, the auditor is verifying that the system is fit for purpose and that all data entries and modifications are recorded and traceable. This aligns with 21 CFR Part 11 emphasis on the reliability, accuracy, and consistency of electronic records, and the audit trail's role in ensuring accountability. Furthermore, assessing the data entry procedures and source data verification (SDV) process ensures that the data entered into the EDC system accurately reflects the source documents, a fundamental principle of GCP. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on observing data entry without verifying the system's validation status fails to ensure the fundamental integrity of the EDC system itself. The system could have underlying flaws that compromise data accuracy or security, even if data entry appears correct at the time of observation. This overlooks the requirement for validated systems under 21 CFR Part 11. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes reviewing only the audit trail without examining the system's validation documentation is insufficient. While the audit trail is crucial for traceability, it does not guarantee the system's overall reliability or that it was designed and implemented according to regulatory requirements. A system with a functional audit trail could still produce inaccurate data if not properly validated. Finally, an approach that focuses on user training alone, without verifying system validation and audit trail capabilities, is inadequate. While well-trained users are important, they cannot compensate for a system that is not validated or lacks robust audit trail features, thereby failing to meet the stringent requirements for electronic records. Professional reasoning in such situations requires a systematic approach. Auditors must first understand the applicable regulations, e.g., 21 CFR Part 11, IC E6, R2. They should then develop an audit plan that specifically targets the critical aspects of EDC system use, including validation status, audit trail functionality, data security, and the processes for data entry and verification against source documents. The auditor must critically evaluate evidence, not just observe processes. This involves requesting and reviewing documentation, performing targeted testing of system functionalities, and interviewing relevant personnel. The decision-making process should prioritize regulatory compliance and the assurance of data integrity and patient safety. Question 17. The performance metrics show an increase in the reported incidence of protocol deviation across multiple sites participating in a phase Roman III clinical trial. As a certified clinical research auditor, what is the most appropriate initial course of action to ensure compliance with ICH guidelines? Option A. Classify the deviations as minor administrative errors and recommend no further action, assuming they do not directly affect critical data points. Option B. Advise the sponsor to implement a blanket protocol amendment to address all potential deviation types, regardless of their specific nature. Option C. Conduct a targeted audit of sites with the highest reported deviation rates to investigate the root cause and assess the impact on data integrity and subject safety. Option D. Immediately report the increased deviation rate to the relevant regulatory authorities, citing a potential breach of good clinical practice. The correct answer is C. Conduct a targeted audit of sites with the highest reported deviation rates to investigate the root cause and assess the impact on data integrity and subject safety. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in clinical research auditing where performance data, while indicating a potential issue, requires careful interpretation within the context of ICH guidelines. The auditor must move beyond simply identifying a deviation to understanding its root cause and its impact on data integrity and subject safety, as mandated by ICH E6, R2. The challenge lies in distinguishing between a minor procedural lapse and a significant breach that compromises the reliability of the study results or the rights and well-being of participants. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation into the specific instances of protocol deviations, focusing on the root cause and the potential impact on data integrity and subject safety. This aligns directly with ICH E6 R2 Section 5. 1. Essential documents for the quality management of clinical trials, and Section 5. 2. Quality management, which emphasize the importance of identifying, documenting, and addressing deviations from the protocol. Specifically, IC E6 R2 Section 8. 10. Monitoring requires monitors to report deviations, and ICH E6 R2 Section 8. 11. Monitoring requires sponsors to ensure that deviations are handled appropriately. A deep dive into the nature of the deviations, their frequency, and their potential to affect the study's validity or participant welfare is crucial for determining the appropriate corrective and preventive actions. CAPA. This approach upholds the ethical principles of participant protection and scientific rigor. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately escalate the issue to regulatory authorities based solely on the performance metric without a thorough investigation. This fails to adhere to the principle of proportionality and due diligence mandated by ICH E6 R2 Section 8. 11, which requires sponsors to ensure appropriate handling of deviations. Premature escalation can lead to unnecessary alarm and resource misallocation. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the performance metric as a minor issue without further investigation, assuming it does not impact data integrity or subject safety. This overlooks the potential cumulative effect of multiple deviations and the fundamental requirement of ICH E6 R2 Section 5. 2. To implement a quality management system that ensures the quality of every aspect of the trial. Even seemingly minor deviations, if widespread or unaddressed, can erode the reliability of the study. A third incorrect approach is to focus solely on the number of deviations without understanding their context or severity. IC E6 R2 emphasizes a risk-based approach to quality management. Simply counting deviations without assessing their impact on critical data elements or participant safety is insufficient and does not fulfill the auditor's responsibility to ensure compliance with the protocol and regulatory requirements. Professional reasoning. When faced with performance metrics indicating potential issues, a clinical research auditor must adopt a systematic and investigative approach. The first step is to understand the nature and scope of the observed trend. This involves gathering more detailed information beyond the initial metric. The auditor should then analyze this information in the context of the study protocol, ICH guidelines, particularly ICH E6 R2, regarding quality management and monitoring and other applicable regulations. The focus should always be on the potential impact on data integrity, subject safety, and the reliability of the study results. Based on this analysis, the auditor can then determine the appropriate course of action, which may include further investigation, implementation of CAPA, or, in severe cases, reporting to regulatory authorities. This process ensures that decisions are evidence-based, proportionate, and aligned with the overarching goals of clinical research. Question 18. The audit findings indicate a potential breach in the double-blinding procedure of a Phase Roman III oncology trial, where a pharmacy technician inadvertently dispensed an unlabeled investigational product to a small cohort of patients due to a labeling error. What is the most appropriate immediate action for the principal investigator and study team to take? Option A. Document the labeling error in the source documents and proceed with the trial as planned, assuming the impact is minimal due to the small number of affected patients. Option B. Inform all study participants that a labeling error occurred and that their blinding may have been compromised, without further investigation or specific guidance. Option C. Initiate an immediate investigation to determine the extent of the breach, identify affected participants, and assess the potential impact on the trial's integrity and participant safety while consulting the protocol and sponsor. Option D. Immediately unblind all participants in the affected study arm to ensure all parties are aware of their treatment assignment and to mitigate any potential bias. The correct answer is C. Initiate an immediate investigation to determine the extent of the breach, identify affected participants, and assess the potential impact on the trial's integrity and participant safety while consulting the protocol and sponsor. Explanation. Scenario analysis. The audit findings highlight a critical deviation in the blinding procedures of a clinical trial. Ensuring the integrity of blinding is paramount to prevent bias in treatment assignment, patient reporting of outcomes, and investigator assessment. The challenge lies in determining the appropriate course of action when a breach is identified, balancing the need for immediate corrective action with the potential impact on the trial's validity and the safety of participants. The auditor must assess the nature and extent of the breach to decide on the most effective and compliant remediation strategy. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation to ascertain the extent of the breach and its potential impact on the data. This includes identifying which participants, investigators, or study personnel may have had their blinding compromised. Based on this assessment, a decision must be made regarding the need to reblind participants, exclude compromised data, or, in severe cases, consider terminating the trial. This systematic approach aligns with good clinical practice (GCP) principles, specifically ICH E6 R2 Section 4.1, which emphasizes the investigator's responsibility to conduct the trial according to the protocol, and GCP and Section 5.14 regarding blinding. The goal is to maintain the scientific validity of the trial and protect participant rights and safety by addressing the breach in a manner that minimizes bias and ensures data reliability. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to simply document the breach without taking any immediate corrective action or assessing its impact. This fails to uphold the investigator's responsibility under GCP to ensure the trial is conducted according to the protocol and to protect participants. It also risks the introduction of significant bias, rendering the trial data unreliable and potentially leading to flawed conclusions. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately unblind all participants without a thorough assessment of the breach's scope. This premature unblinding can introduce bias if only some participants or personnel were affected, and it may not be necessary if the breach was minor or contained. It also disregards the protocol's blinding procedures and the ethical considerations of prematurely revealing treatment assignments. A third incorrect approach would be to ignore the breach if it appears to affect only a small number of participants. Even a seemingly minor breach can have a disproportionate impact on the statistical analysis and the overall interpretation of results. GCP requires that all deviations be investigated and addressed to ensure data integrity and participant safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making framework when faced with blinding breaches. This involves 1. Immediate containment. Stop any ongoing breach if possible. 2. Thorough investigation. Determine the cause, extent, and impact of the breach. 3. Risk assessment. Evaluate the potential for bias and its effect on data integrity and participant safety. 4. Protocol adherence. Consult the study protocol for specific procedures related to blinding breaches. 5. Regulatory compliance. Ensure all actions align with GCP and relevant regulatory guidelines, e.g., IC E6 R2. 6. Stakeholder communication. Inform the sponsor, ethics committee/IRB, and other relevant parties as required. 7. Corrective and preventive actions. Implement appropriate measures to rectify the situation and prevent recurrence. Question 19. Regulatory review indicates that a clinical trial protocol clearly defines a primary endpoint as the change from baseline in a specific biomarker at week 12, and secondary endpoints related to patient-reported outcomes. During the audit, it is noted that the final study report highlights a statistically significant improvement in a different biomarker, not previously designated as primary or secondary, which was collected as part of exploratory data. The report presents this finding prominently, suggesting it is a key outcome of the study, which approach by the auditor best upholds the integrity of the clinical trial data and regulatory compliance. Option A. The auditor should accept the reporting of the exploratory biomarker finding as a significant outcome, as it demonstrates a positive effect, and focus the audit on the accuracy of the data collection for this biomarker. Option B. The auditor should focus the audit solely on the statistical methods used to analyze the exploratory biomarker, as the significant finding suggests the statistical plan was effective in identifying potential benefits. Option C. The auditor should question the prominence given to the exploratory biomarker finding, ensuring it is clearly identified as exploratory and not misrepresented as a primary or secondary outcome, and verify that the analysis of the predefined primary and secondary endpoints is accurately reported according to the protocol. Option D. The auditor should recommend that the study be considered a success based on the statistically significant exploratory biomarker finding, and advise the sponsor to submit this as a primary endpoint in future regulatory filings. Correct answer is C. The auditor should question the prominence given to the exploratory biomarker finding, ensuring it is clearly identified as exploratory and not misrepresented as a primary or secondary outcome, and verify that the analysis of the predefined primary and secondary endpoints is accurately reported according to the protocol. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential for misinterpretation of endpoint definitions, which can significantly impact the validity and interpretability of clinical trial results. Auditors must exercise careful judgment to ensure that the study design and data analysis align precisely with the predefined endpoints. The integrity of the trial hinges on the accurate and consistent application of these definitions. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to the protocol's pre-specified endpoint definitions. This aligns with good clinical practice, GCP principles, specifically ICH E6, R2 Section 5.14, which mandates that the protocol clearly define the objectives and endpoints of the study. Accurate endpoint definition is crucial for ensuring the scientific validity of the trial and the reliability of its findings. It allows for objective assessment of the treatment effect and supports regulatory decision-making. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on statistical significance without considering the predefined endpoint definition fails to uphold the scientific rigor of the trial. This could lead to reporting findings that were not the primary objective of the study, potentially misleading stakeholders and undermining the trial's purpose. This violates the principle of conducting research according to the approved protocol and can be seen as a deviation from GCP. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes post-hoc analysis of secondary endpoints, as if they were primary endpoints, is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This practice, often referred to as p-hacking or data dredging, can lead to the reporting of spurious findings that are not reproducible and do not reflect a genuine treatment effect. It circumvents the pre-specified statistical analysis plan and compromises the integrity of the research. This directly contravenes ICH E6, R2 Section 5.14 and 5.18, which emphasize the importance of a pre-specified statistical analysis plan and the distinction between primary and secondary endpoints. A further incorrect approach that dismisses the importance of exploratory endpoints in the final analysis overlooks their role in generating hypotheses for future research. While not intended to prove efficacy, exploratory endpoints contribute to a comprehensive understanding of the investigational product's effects. Ignoring them entirely can limit the scientific value derived from the trial and may not fully inform subsequent research directions, potentially missing valuable insights. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough review of the protocol's objectives and endpoint definitions. Auditors must verify that the statistical analysis plan directly addresses these predefined endpoints, and that the reported results accurately reflect the outcomes for each specified endpoint category: primary, secondary, and exploratory. Any deviations or reclassifications of endpoints must be critically evaluated for justification and compliance with regulatory requirements and ethical standards. Question 20. Process analysis reveals that a clinical research site has consistently failed to adhere to the protocol's inclusion criteria for participant enrollment, leading to the inclusion of several ineligible subjects. The auditor has documented these instances. What is the most appropriate next step in the CAPA process? Option A. Issue a formal warning to the principal investigator and require them to personally review and approve all future participant enrollments until compliance is achieved. Option B. Correct the eligibility status of the already enrolled subjects and document the findings in the audit report, assuming the issue will resolve itself with increased awareness. Option C. Implement a comprehensive retraining program for all site staff involved in participant screening and enrollment, focusing on protocol inclusion/exclusion criteria and the importance of strict adherence, followed by a period of enhanced monitoring of new enrollments. Option D. Update the site's standard operating procedures, SOP, to include a more detailed checklist for screening, and then consider the CAPA closed. The correct answer is C. Implement a comprehensive retraining program for all site staff involved in participant screening and enrollment, focusing on protocol inclusion/exclusion criteria and the importance of strict adherence, followed by a period of enhanced monitoring of new enrollments. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in clinical research auditing, identifying the root cause of a deviation and implementing effective corrective and preventive actions, CAPA. The professional challenge lies in moving beyond simply documenting the immediate issue to thoroughly investigating its underlying causes and ensuring that similar problems do not recur. This requires critical thinking, a deep understanding of the protocol, good clinical practice, GCP principles, and the specific regulatory requirements of the United States, as implied by the CCRA exam context. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it adheres to the fundamental principles of quality management and regulatory compliance. A robust CAPA system, as mandated by regulations such as the U.S. Food and Drug Administration's FDA 21 CFR Part 11 and principles outlined in ICH E6 R2, requires not only identifying the deviation, but also determining its root cause, implementing corrective actions to address the immediate problem, and preventive actions to stop it from happening again. This systematic approach ensures the integrity of the data, the safety of the participants, and the reliability of the study results. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on documenting the deviation without investigating the root cause fails to meet the spirit and letter of regulatory requirements. This can lead to recurring issues, potentially compromising data integrity and participant safety. For example, if the deviation is a data entry error and the root cause is inadequate training, simply correcting the entry without retraining staff is a failure to implement a preventive action. This oversight can be considered a deficiency in the quality system and a potential violation of GCP principles, as it does not demonstrate a commitment to preventing future errors. Another incorrect approach might be to implement a corrective action that is not proportionate to the deviation or its potential impact. For instance, if a minor data discrepancy is found, implementing a complete overhaul of the data management system without a thorough risk assessment would be an inefficient and potentially disruptive response. This demonstrates a lack of sound judgment and an inability to apply risk-based principles, which are central to modern regulatory oversight. A third incorrect approach could be to blame an individual without investigating systemic issues. While individual accountability is important, GCP and quality management principles emphasize identifying systemic or process-related failures. Focusing solely on an individual without exploring potential training gaps, unclear procedures, or inadequate resources fails to address the underlying causes and is therefore unlikely to prevent recurrence. This can also create a negative work environment and discourage open reporting of issues. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Thoroughly understand the deviation and its immediate impact. 2. Investigate to identify the root cause, using appropriate methodologies, e.g., 5 whys fishbone diagrams. 3. Develop specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, smart corrective actions to address the immediate problem. 4. Develop equally robust preventive actions that target the identified root cause, to prevent recurrence. 5. Document the entire CAPA process meticulously, including the investigation, actions taken, and verification of effectiveness. 6. Ensure that the CAPA is reviewed and approved by appropriate personnel. 7. Monitor the effectiveness of the implemented CAPA over time.